Can everybody hear me? There we go. Ooh, making noise. All right. Good afternoon. Is everyone having a good time? Hope so. Yes. Good, good, good so far. Well, we do have a special lunchtime presentation for you. So I want to go ahead and get started with introducing our keynotes for the lunch. So the topic is on the cultural kaleidoscope of perinatal mental health. So our first presenter, Bindu Garapaty, is a licensed psychologist and the co-founder of The Happy Leader. Her research has focused on leadership development, cultural identity, and self-awareness. The Happy Leader model emphasizes increasing happiness, improving performance, overcoming adversity, and enhancing the human experience of resiliency for youth and adults. Bindu's presentations include national and international forums in leadership, education, and women's health. As a maternal child health consultant, Bindu has worked with the University of Illinois at Chicago and North Shore University Health System to advance public awareness and understanding of perinatal mood disorders. Currently, she's an executive committee member for the 2020 Mom Project, a national initiative involving hospitals, insurance companies, consumers, and providers. Bindu has held clinical and leadership roles within varied healthcare settings, including hospitals, universities, private practice, and for-profit and not-for-profit organizations. She has taught graduate school courses in diversity, child and adolescent development, and community and mental health through professionalization groups and seminars. Okay. Her co-presenter is Juli Fraga. Juli is a licensed psychologist who specializes in women's health concerns with a particular focus on reproductive and maternal wellness. She helps women explore and adjust to the many transitions that emerge during pregnancy and motherhood, including preparing for pregnancy, reproductive health concerns, adjusting to motherhood, baby blues, postpartum depression, and anxiety. Her clinical work is informed by her training in psychodynamic and psychoanalytic theory, as well as mindfulness-based practices. She brings a depth-oriented yet practical approach to her work. She has completed several mindful parenting trainings, as well as clinical trainings in the assessment, diagnosis, and treatment of perinatal mood concerns, including postpartum depression and anxiety. Dr. Fraga integrates a mind-body approach focusing on the holistic well-being of each individual. She works with individuals for short-term and longer-term treatment. She also facilitates postpartum support groups for the University of California, San Francisco, and is an adjunct clinical faculty member at California Pacifica Medical Center. She's an active volunteer with the Postpartum Support International and the California Maternal Mental Health Collaborative 2020 Mom Project. So please welcome Dr. Bindu Garapaty and Dr. Juli Fraga.
Good afternoon. Just want to make one slight correction. I'm not licensed psychologist. That's okay. My doctorate is in clinical psychology, and I do a lot more executive coaching and focusing more on strategic, high-level structural change. So a little bit about myself and why I'm so excited to be here today, and thank you for this opportunity. Julie and I have presented together before, and we love doing this in tandem. I was at North Shore University Health System, and we were on a consult line, and there was a South Asian woman who had called in, and immediately my colleague said, "Bindu, you take this. She's Indian." And I said, okay. I got on the phone, I introduced myself, and immediately she hung up. So we thought, okay, what happened here? And again, in my cultural training, in my education, oftentimes I think we look for similarity, right? Indian client caller, Indian therapist, let's just put the two together. The woman called back again, thankfully, and this time the original provider stayed connected with her on the phone, and I sat in tandem, kind of guiding, talking about some of the cultural nuances and kind of educating in the process. And it was in that moment that I really realized how important it is to talk about the diversity perspective and the burden of that responsibility and how that falls on all of us.
Thank you so much, Bindu. And my name is Julie, and I'm a psychologist in San Francisco, where I specialize in working with women's health concerns, maternal mental health, and reproductive concerns. And my interest in looking more at the cultural pieces that really inform women's experiences during the postpartum period and extend well into motherhood really were born out of the birth of my own daughter 6 years ago. And I remember being at the hospital and really kind of having this insight about culturally sensitive birthing practices. You know, in certain cultures, birthing practices look different than they do in American hospitals. And so it was shortly after that that I put together a talk with some other colleagues for the American Psychological Association on culturally sensitive birthing practices during the postpartum period. And kind of over the years, a few years ago now, Bindu and I met and had an intuitive just connection and decided to collaborate and work together to really talk about what we feel is sometimes not given enough kind of attention when it comes to perinatal mood concerns, which are the cultural threads that inform assessment, diagnosis, and treatment of women and families. So that's where we're going to start today, and we have a presentation for you all, and Bindu's going to start us off.
So, of course, we all love tests, right? We saw from the presentation earlier this morning the stress up and down, up and down. So I'm going to put a cultural competency test out there for you. Suppose you're on a boat with your mother, your partner, and your child. Suddenly, the boat begins to sink. Not a trick question. You determine that you can only save one of the passengers. Whom do you save? Just take a moment to think about it. How many of you would save your child? Okay. How many of you would save your mother? We can talk about mother-child attachment and relationships later on. How many of you would save your partner? There's a lot of love in this room, huh? Well, look at this. According to the statistics, US citizens, 60% would save their spouse. Now, they obviously didn't interview this room. 40% would save their child. It looks like we're kind of reversed in here. Now, with the Asians, 100% would have saved their mothers. 100%. So think about the cultural lens, right? When we meet with the people that we work with, our communities, we're not going in tabla rasa, right? We'd like to, but we have our own cultural lens on. So who wants to hear about the rationale of why 100% would save their mothers? Children, you can reproduce. Partners, you can find another one. You'll only have one mother. That's the way the mindset, the worldview, the paradigm is shaped. So here we have an example of low cultural competence. So we're going to have a video play for you. So bear with us. Again, we had a cultural test in terms of Mac versus PCs.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
They're keeping you in suspense.
Yes.
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, well, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Plan moments of reflection, right? Think about what they're saying.
Eating lunch in between.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well.
Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Drop the moment to you. Let's get a small tea, small tea! Double, double, toil and trouble. Montague, beware Jack the Ripper. Bloody hell. Pip, pip. Cheerio.
I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
I never get tired of that video. I never get tired of it. And of course, none of us do this, right? None of us do this. I can't tell you how many times those kinds of microaggressions happen at a conscious or even subconscious level. I grew up in Michigan, in a pretty rural part of the state, and was the only person of color. And instead of getting angry when I got questions like, "Are you a dot buster?" People coming up and rubbing my skin saying, "Oh, it doesn't come off, the skin color." My parents were amazing immigrants, and my father particularly always said, educate. Educate. This is your opportunity. This is your burden of responsibility to talk about it. So it felt like I was an ambassador for Indian culture. Being born and raised in Michigan, I knew everything about Indians, right? Not. But it was a great opportunity for me to be able to learn more about my culture, my heritage, what it meant for me, and to be able to use that to share in any opportunity, any interaction that I've had. Oftentimes people will see my name, Bindu, and they'll meet me in person and say, "Oh, you're Indian," after we've talked on the phone. Yes, I am, and do you know what part of India I'm from, and this and that, and be able to kind of share that information in that dialogue. And again, I encourage all of us to think about what it means in terms of our own ethnicity, race, culture, heritage.
And Bindu and I were putting together our talk, and I came across this quote that I really love by a physician, Rachel Naomi Remen, who is a pediatrician and has done a lot of work on kindness and empathy. But I think it really sums up kind of some of the main tenets of cultural competency. Oftentimes, I think when we are working with other people, we're all in kind of service-oriented professions. It's so common that we use the word help. You go somewhere, how can I help you? But Dr. Remen really points out that when we kind of come from the position of believing that we can help another person, we're actually creating a distance between ourselves and that person because we assume that we know something more than they do. We assume that we know better. And she says, fixing and helping create a distance between people. We cannot serve at a distance. We can only serve that to which we are profoundly connected. And she talks about using the word service. When we serve others, we serve them from our soul. We serve from a place of equality. And so I kind of think about in the cultural pieces of the work and the differences between sympathy and empathy. If I have sympathy, I am kind of feeling for you. But you can probably feel that I don't feel what you feel. But when I have empathy, I can really feel with you. And so we want to show a short video that really emphasizes that piece.
And it's just to add on to what Dr. Jeff Andrade had said earlier this morning in terms of my children are your children are my children. I get that here, but to translate it, it's having those personal experiences, right? How can you have really walked in my shoes unless you've really, really walked in my shoes? And that dialogue comes from having those conversations with individuals who are different than us and who are similar to us, but being able to have it in a fun, open, honest, candid type of conversation. You can tell we love videos. Should we have technical difficulties? Oh. Move on? Okay, we can try one
Okay,
more time.
great.
Gives you guys opportunity to not have to multitask and be mindful about the lunch you're having, right? How many of you guys had seen that earlier video before? Okay, a few of you. Okay, let's keep going. Why don't we move to the next slide? We have a lot to share with you, so. Okay,
Do you want to go over this?
so we were taking a look at the demographic breakdown in terms of ethnicities in the San Bernardino County, and many of you may already be familiar with this, but considering that we're coming from Northern California, it helped to give us a perspective in terms of the population. So when we're looking at Hispanic, non-white, Black, non-Hispanic, Asian alone, again, we spend a lot of our time discussing it from an Asian cultural lens, obviously, because that's where we can speak to in terms of expertise area. And we noticed that in San Bernardino County, it's 6.1% of the population, so it seems somewhat small relative to the other numbers. However, did we know that Asian encompasses all these different groups? And the astounding statistic for me always is that by 2050, there are going to be 34 million Asians in the US. Again, coming from Michigan, this is just unbelievable to me. Looking for someone of brown skin, someone that looked like me, talked like me, understood cultural values like me was such a unique experience. I moved here from Chicago about 3.5 years ago, and now I'm in Silicon Valley, heart of Silicon Valley. And if any of you have been there, everybody looks like me. What's my unique characteristic in defining individuality? It's helped me to reevaluate what it means for me to be Asian, for me to be South Asian in particular. So again, looking at and educating ourselves in terms of regional differences and what it means. South Asian incorporates Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Sri Lankan. And within that, there are such cultural variations between what we wear, how we communicate, what we eat, how we parent, how we raise our children, how we think of our hierarchy, how we think of power, how we think of maternal mental health. So I bring these words to you, culture, race, and ethnicity. And I want you to think about your own culture. I do a lot of executive coaching, corporate trainings, and we talk about culture all the time. It doesn't necessarily always mean ethnicity. We know that. It's a belief system, it's an attitude, and the part that I think is so important is that culture is created by all of us. It's an ecosystem.
Also, in thinking about race refers to people who share a genetic heritage, and also ethnicity, the classification of people based on their national origin.
So as we saw in that video earlier, again, where are you from? What is he really asking? He wants to know about her ethnicity, right? Now, when somebody asks me that, I think, interesting, okay, you want to know that. Why? What is it that you want? What kinds of information are you trying to gather about me? Are you putting me into a box because, Indians do this, Asians do this, African Americans do this? This is the culture that comes from being able to understand and recognize what a certain ethnicity or race dictates. So important to think about as we're working with our communities, what is our own culture, ethnicity, and race? And that level of self-awareness heightens our ability to connect in a very authentic and empowering way.
So we want to look at some differences just between Eastern and Western culture, and we'll delve more into these later on when we give some case examples. But one of the main differences, and certainly something we keep in mind when working with the maternal mental health population and women's health, is a difference of family structure. You know, in the Western culture, we tend to be very individualistic. And in non-Western culture, there tends to be more collectivism. So, more thinking about the whole kind of family unit. Everybody is working together as a unit. And I think that's so important in working with women's health, even during pregnancy, even, when you think of having a baby shower, like in, America, we think of a baby shower as you register at Target or Babies R Us, and your friends come over and you have cupcakes and you play some games. Maybe you do some fun game with diapers or something. But, there's a lot of other kind of birthing ceremonies that have cultural relevance for people who, are from other cultures. And Bindu has a great example of the ceremony that you were given during your pregnancy.
So I have a 7-year-old daughter. And again, being born and raised in the United States, my husband is ethnically from India. So we went back in my 6th month of pregnancy, and my mother-in-law was very, very adamant in having a ceremony for me called the semantics ceremony, which is very common in his region of southern India. We're from different states in India. And I kept asking my husband, I'm like, what is this? Like, what do we have to do? All those kinds of things. I don't know. How am I supposed to know these things, right? Talk to my mom. So my mom explained it as, okay, you just sit there. We're going to feed you lots of sweets. And your relatives are all the women in our family are going to come and just give you blessings. Now, again, we speak different languages. We have a hard enough time with English, let alone any other language, right? But what happened when we were there is that many of my extended female relatives traveled 6 hours by train, hand-making all kinds of incredible desserts, incredible sweets. And what they did, each and every one of them, there were about 100 people there, each and every one of them would come, say a prayer, give me a piece of advice in a different language, and feed me this sweet and put a bracelet on my hand, a bangle. Simantam is equivalent to a bangle ceremony. So it was interesting because my husband wasn't supposed to be there, but again, because of language barriers and a little bit of cultural barriers, I wanted him there. And he would translate things for me. So these aunties and these female peers, would say things, and they would go on and on and on, and I would ask him, what are they saying? Oh, you look nice. Okay, just good luck to the baby. Okay, this, okay. So you can only imagine how loved this baby is and how it transcended language barriers in terms of me feeling completely supported, even though I knew that this was going to be a very short vacation for us to be there, and I was going to come back to Chicago and be with my friends and have the diaper party, the baby showers that we have here. But all I kept thinking is how powerful and how unbelievable the support structure is. And when I came back, I was incredibly excited to share with my friends because this is the interesting piece. The symbolism behind the bangles is that you wear enough bangles that during the time of labor, for all of you mothers out there, you're supposed to shake the bangles as a way to distract you from the pains of labor. I don't know how well it worked because I went with the epidural. So. But again, how it transcended through culture, through language, through food, through symbolism, brought me to tears. And all I kept thinking about, and again, in India, I didn't reveal that we knew it was a girl. For obvious reasons, there's a lot of cultural things surrounding that. But how incredibly loved and how powerful this circle of women are for my daughter to be. And there's lots of pictures, and we share this with her, and it's really funny. Of course, I don't explain why the noise of the bangles, what that means or symbolizes to her. But she constantly says, Mommy, did each one of those bangles, do you remember which auntie gave them to you? And how powerful she takes that legacy on for her. And yes, each bangle was of a different color, size, symbol that they would bring, picking it out specifically for me and the baby.
And I think that's such a great example of the differences between cultures, because I think here in the Western world, birthing and the postpartum period focuses a lot on the baby. Yet Bindu's giving a great example about cultures where birthing and becoming a mother focuses a lot on the mother. And I think that's so important to remember when we're doing maternal mental health and women's health work. You know, there's another ceremony that I went to for a girlfriend that was called a blessing way, where you literally read poems and you bless the way for the mother and the baby, but the focus really is on the mother. And so that's something that we'll talk more about when we delve into kind of diagnosing, assessing, and treating perinatal mood concerns. But those are some of the distinctions we want to make in Western versus non-Western culture. So just looking at kind of some cultural understandings, broad range around various cultures, and looking at the Chicana and Latina communities as well, kind of an understanding again about the role of mother, can be more of a collective family structure. Also keeping in mind that with other cultures, there can be focus more on indigenous healing practices. That, you know, if you're not feeling well, whether or not that's physically or emotionally, and emotionally if you're not feeling well, that might come out physically, and that you might go to more indigenous healers to have that remedied, reaching out to spiritualistas, reaching out for, you know, kind of elders for some types of support, and also keeping in mind someone's level of acculturation, that not everyone, as Bindu said, not every Asian is the same, not every Korean is the same. Looking at level of acculturation, generational status in the United States, finding out about family history.
And I think one of the important pieces that I've gotten feedback on is, again, that openness to be able to dialogue and ask about those questions, right? So considering that I'm from the southern part of India, if I meet somebody that's from a different part of India, asking what their rituals are, do you have rituals? How have they been transcended onto you? How have they been shared? And again, I think that intergenerational, whether you're an immigrant, a first generation, second generation, Gen Zer, how they perceive some of those things. Initially, me going into that, I was very hesitant because I didn't know what was going on. What does this mean? And how is this going to play out? And what do you mean? In my Western way of thinking, my husband has to be there with me. What do you mean I have to do this on my own? So being sensitive to those kinds of things, but also being able to ask in a culturally sensitive way, how do we practice that? And part of it is by dialoguing with each other.
Also looking at some cultural understandings in the Black and African American community, also keeping in mind family structure, the role of women oftentimes at the center of the household, lack of trust sometimes for doctors and mental health professionals because of racism, and as Dr. Andre talked about this morning, microaggressions that occur. We know research-wise that maternal mortality rates have decreased in the United States, but they have not decreased for Black and African American women for a variety of reasons: healthcare disparities, racism, trust and mistrust of doctors. So that's really important to kind of keep in mind when doing maternal mental health work. And also, where does someone get their support from? Knowing what the resources are, which we'll talk more about later, in their community, and that might come by way of spirituality, religious affiliations, community organizations, other kind of friends and family. So we want to talk a little bit now about kind of weaving this all together and about postpartum depression or perinatal mood concerns. Postpartum depression kind of sometimes is used to refer to a lot of different postpartum mood concerns. So we're going to talk about not only postpartum depression, but also postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD, the less common postpartum psychosis, and also the baby blues. But when we refer to the postpartum period, that really refers to women for up to 1 year after they give birth and have babies. We know that there are different causes of postpartum depression. One of the main things, people ask me this all the time: how is postpartum depression different than depression? How do I know what makes it postpartum? Why do I need a different treatment because I'm postpartum? Well, one of the main factors in depression or mood concerns after a woman gives birth are certainly the biological factors, because hormonal changes are occurring during pregnancy. Progesterone and estrogen raise at rapid rates. They kind of level off during the second trimester. They raise a little bit again in the third trimester. But immediately after the birth of the baby, those hormones really take a dive. And for some women, they're more sensitive to those hormonal changes than other women. I heard a psychiatrist at a maternal mental health conference refer to it as cactuses or lilies. Some women are cactuses. They are really hardy around hormonal changes and they're not as affected by them. But some women are lilies and they tend to be really affected by hormonal shifts that really tends to affect their mood. Certainly, if a woman has a previous history of depression or a mood concern, not only for herself, but also in her family, we know that that does increase risk for a perinatal mood concern.
And I think the other point to distinguish with postpartum depression is that you may not have had it with your first child, but you could have it with your second or your third. And it's important to distinguish because oftentimes you'll hear moms say, well, I didn't have it with my first one, so why am I having it with my second one? Or they've had it with their first child, and that anticipation and that anxiety that they're going to have those similar symptoms with their second or even third causes them to kind of reflect and seek out treatment when they may not need it at that point, or they can try alternative ways of looking and dealing with the symptoms proactively, preventatively. So when we look at how the racial piece is impacted, Sue and Sue are two researchers that have done a lot of work, significant work. Has anybody ever heard of Sue and Sue, Daryl Wing Sue? Okay. So their work focuses on different racial ethnic groups and the stages that we kind of go through. So when you look at the stages of identity, as well as you look at the stages of motherhood, pregnancy, planning for pregnancy, the whole spectrum, you can see a lot of ebbs and flows. So what Sue and Sue have talked about is that they view connecting with communities in a mindset of majority culture versus minority culture. So the different stages outlined are conformity, dissonance, resistance and immersion, introspection, and integrative awareness. So when you look at conformity, this is a preference for the dominant culture. So an example, and this can be replaced with any ethnic identity, I dislike being Indian, I want to be more American. This is what it looks like. So when you meet with an individual of an Asian background and they're in this stage, they want to identify with the majority culture, the majority way of thinking. Again, being an American-born Indian, I see myself as different because I look different. My family structure and upbringing was very different than the community that I was raised in. However, my husband, born and raised in India, was part of the dominant culture. So he comes into this culture having that sense of dominance in that I'm part of the majority way of thinking, the mindset, again, the worldview. So the dissonance stage, person challenges previously held beliefs and attitudes. So what does this translate to practically? Being Indian is okay, and you know what? Being American has its challenges too. It's not as idealistic as I thought. Resistance and immersion, what does this look like? The Indian culture is so rich and beautiful, being Indian is cool. American culture isn't so great. Wait a second. Why did I want to follow some of these trends or some of these mindsets? Introspection, exactly what it means, taking that time for that self-awareness to emerge. I think as we looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs earlier this morning, this is a stage that is so important. There are pros and cons to both. Let me evaluate what applies in my life, in my lifestyle, in my community. Integrative awareness. This is where I always joke that I can wear an Indian outfit and a skirt or Western wear, not at the same time, but feel comfortable in both and be able to move. Sometimes when I do diversity trainings, I'll actually wear a sari, an Indian outfit, and not say a word and kind of show some slides and ask people to write a narrative of who they think I am, what they think my background is. And again, I'll open my mouth and it'll be a very different image of than what you see. And that first 2 minutes, right, we all know this. We make impressions, we make judgments within the first 20 seconds of meeting someone. And then it's that opportunity to get to know them where that integrative awareness comes in for both the dynamic relationship and their interaction between the two to really understand what does it mean. And there are wonderful values within both identities and culture.
So I want to spend some time kind of going over kind of just broadly the range of postpartum mood concerns. So I'm going to start off with the baby blues. And the baby blues are not they are not a diagnosable postpartum mood concern, but rather this is a normal kind of ebb and flow of mood that about 80 to 90% of new mothers experience. And this usually happens immediately following the birth of the baby. And the baby blues go away about 2 weeks after the baby's born. I always share with my patients that, 10 days, if they're not feeling great after the baby's been born, better to come in and have a postpartum or perinatal mood screening. But generally speaking, baby blues, mom's feeling overwhelmed, she might feel tearful, she could have some worry about the baby. Daniel Stern, who is a psychoanalyst that's done a lot of research on mothers and babies, talks about just kind of the natural anxiety of motherhood, that once we have the baby, the focus goes really towards, can I keep this baby alive, this small being that I've carried in my body in birth, can I really keep the baby alive? And there's some normal anxiety that exists there, some normal worry. With the baby blues, one of the hallmark distinctions, though, between baby blues and other perinatal mood concerns is that the baby blues don't get worse over time. They tend to kind of go away on their own, and they're kind of, like anything, a reaction to a new situational stressor. We know having babies it's a happy thing, but it's also a stressful thing. So they generally don't last more than a couple of weeks. Kind of unknown to many people, however, postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety are actually the number one complication of childbirth. Surprisingly, they're the number one complication of childbirth, and yet we know that very few women are properly screened, assessed, diagnosed, and receive the treatment that they need when suffering from postpartum depression or anxiety. They affect approximately 15 to 70% of mothers. Symptoms of postpartum depression, they're similar to the baby blues, except that they amplify. They do not get better over time. So mom starts to feel very overwhelmed, very sad. She might cry a lot. Some moms feel a lack of interest in the baby. They might isolate from friends or family, may feel guilty, have a lot of thoughts about feeling guilty, like she's not a good mother. Some moms report feeling very irritable. These symptoms are more intense than the blues, and they do last more than 2 to 3 weeks, and they worsen over time. Postpartum anxiety, now oftentimes I'll see patients and they have postpartum depression and anxiety, like one is kind of feeding the other, but I want to spend some time talking about postpartum anxiety because it's actually quite common and it doesn't receive enough kind of attention in the media. When we think of maternal mental health concerns, 99% of the time, people tend to mistake one, postpartum psychosis for postpartum depression, or we tend to talk about postpartum depression as an umbrella term for maternal mental health concerns, and it's important to really know the distinctions so that we can ask questions when we're sitting with women and families. So postpartum anxiety affects approximately between 10 to 13 of new mothers. Some overlap symptoms of postpartum depression, feeling overwhelmed, extreme worry, though, about the baby, but these worries can also become more general. So mom can start to have just a lot of generalized anxiety and worry about things that have nothing to do necessarily with the baby. I recently saw a new mother in my office, and after her baby was born, for some reason she had an extreme fear of driving her car. Her husband had to drive her to the office. This kind of, just came out of nowhere, she said, after her baby was born, but I think it really spoke to motherhood really opening up a way that she started to feel really unsafe in the world and kind of helping her to explore that. So anxiety can be worry about the baby, but it can be about other types of worries too. These moms might have symptoms of panic. So the fight or flight response may have been activated, which moms are more sensitive to anyway during this time because of sleep deprivation and kind of being on alert to a baby's cries. So they might have racing heart, sweating, shortness of breath, difficulty sleeping. So, postpartum OCD, this is a perinatal mood concern that we don't unfortunately talk a lot about. It's one of the most misunderstood perinatal mood concerns, and it affects between 10 to 17% of new mothers. These moms have extreme anxiety and intrusive thoughts about the baby, but unlike postpartum anxiety, to relieve the anxiety, they engage in repetitious behaviors. hand washing, door checking. They might continually go in and check on the baby, have to keep checking on the baby to alleviate the anxiety associated with these thoughts and beliefs. And then lastly, postpartum psychosis. That's unfortunately the postpartum mood concern that we hear about most frequently. Oftentimes people think postpartum depression is postpartum psychosis. We hear stories about mothers that harm their babies. The important thing to know is that postpartum psychosis is very rare. It affects 1% to 2% of new mothers, but it is very serious. So if a mom has symptoms of postpartum psychosis, it's really important that she receive help immediately. She has a loss of touch with reality. She sometimes feels that someone is going to hurt the baby. She might feel that somebody's going to, I've worked with moms where they felt like someone was going to maybe kidnap their baby. They might feel like other people are out to get them, that their house is being, under surveillance. But this requires immediate medical intervention. And I would say with postpartum psychosis, talk therapy is not going to be enough. With, depending on the range of severity with other postpartum mood concerns, someone might be able to start with talk therapy or some support even from an OB or a social worker at the hospital, but postpartum psychosis requires more medical intervention, oftentimes medication and hospitalization.
And just to add on to the postpartum psychosis piece, I was doing some psychoeducation with a Latina group of women. And it's fascinating, again, because they get their information passed on from families and grandmothers and other women in their community. And what they hear as postpartum depression or baby blues, they think it's what they see on the news that's really postpartum psychosis. And so we kind of talk about, well, I don't want to be seen as someone that's going to hurt my baby or hurt myself, nor do I want to go and get help, because that's going to imply that I may hurt my baby or hurt myself. When the reality is that we can take a step back and say, there are things like baby blues, postpartum depression, anxiety that comes with the postpartum. How do we put that information out there in culturally sensitive ways where that information could be shared intergenerationally?
So looking at, what are some causes of postpartum depression? So we've kind of reviewed biological causes, the hormonal changes that ensue after giving birth, but there also can be some social kind of causes or correlations, I would more accurately say. And I think it's really important to kind of keep in mind what some of these variables are when we're working with people from, women from various cultural backgrounds. I've certainly worked with moms where, their moms came to live with them to help care for the baby, which seems like a wonderful thing, and yet that ended up being a huge stressor. That was a big stressor, and because of, cultural beliefs in the family around seeking therapy, each week that, they were coming to my office to see me, they were telling their mom they were at the gym, and then in terms of communicating with their moms about some of their emotional struggles, we were kind of thinking together about ways that they could have the conversation where mom wasn't going to feel like she wasn't important as a grandmother, as a mother, kind of looking at family roles, but also looking at some ways that mom might be, grandma in this case, might be able to hear about some emotional concerns from a more medical lens that could help the mom to feel more supported and feel better about having her mother living with her. So certainly we know that a woman that might have an unplanned pregnancy or just some ambivalent feelings about motherhood, that can increase risk for a postpartum mood concern. Lack of social support. So I think this is a really, important variable to keep in mind when we're working with women from various cultural backgrounds. Does family live in another country? Is their family kind of around? What is the immigration status? Who are the key players of community? Who are community supports that we can make connections with? Marital or relationship conflict, which I think is also very important to keep in mind when we're working with women of various cultural backgrounds, because certainly in some, Asian cultures, South Asian cultures, you would never talk about your marital or relationship conflict. The way that marriage came to be is different than the way that it, comes to be kind of in the more Western world. So kind of keeping that in mind. Financial difficulties, certainly previous pregnancy loss or reproductive concerns, And then medical kind of unexpected pregnancy-related stressors, diabetes, premature birth, having a child with special needs are all factors that can also increase risk.
And we'll just kind of glaze over the symptoms of postpartum depression, as important as they are. These are referenced in several places, but again, we look at the emotional piece of it, especially the lack of joy, the feelings of shame, particularly within ethnic communities. The guilt, the shame tend to be on top of the list. The mood swings, bonding with the baby, I think we can all agree that the mother's maternal health impacts that connection, that bond, and just the raising of the children in that home, the family unit, and how important that is to get the mom's services, right? You know, in that cultural competency test in the beginning, you know, the assumption is that if this ship is sinking, you will save yourself. And who is that other person that you're going to bring along with you? But the focus, shifting that focus in terms of the mother being able to take care of herself, have the resources put in place, and operating from a place of strength versus a place of deficiency or an inadequacy can really help in terms of shifting the lens of what's important and how do we help and be able to provide the open doors for services.
So certainly looking at some cultural variables that can impact risk for maternal mental health concerns. We've already talked about lack of family or social support, multiple caretakers involved. Also keeping in mind gender of the baby, and not only mom's feelings about the gender of the baby, but also extended family and their feelings about gender of the baby. Certainly this is made even more complicated. I've worked with women who were, you know, from Asian kind of backgrounds who had done multiple rounds of fertility treatments or IVF, become pregnant, but found out they were pregnant with a girl, and how, you know, shameful this felt, not only because they wanted to have a boy because of the meaning boys held in the family, but also because of the time and finances that were devoted towards starting a family and feeling hopeless about the ability to have another child biologically. Initial process of acculturation, certainly genetics, lack of understanding of symptoms. Sometimes there's some beliefs that this is just my karma, spiritual or religious beliefs. And also keeping in mind that in Asian and Indian communities, postpartum depression and maternal mental health concerns oftentimes go unrecognized, underreported. Women tend to suffer alone and sometimes believe this is a natural consequence of childbirth. So I want to read a blog post that was written by a woman that Bindu and I both know who lives in Berkeley. Her name is Charlene, and she experienced a very severe postpartum psychosis after her baby was born. However, she knew kind of after the baby was born, several months in, something was not feeling right. Her mom, I think, also was living with her. Charlene is Chinese. And all of her family and friends kind of talked about going to acupuncture, doing, you know, taking holistic remedies, which honestly are all things that can help, you know, that can help with mood concerns. She did go see a therapist. However, this therapist was not trained in diagnosing and treating perinatal mood concerns, and certainly not from a more cultural lens. You know, I certainly see women in my office that want to go and try acupuncture, and I welcome that and say, you know, if you're not still feeling better, then let's look at something else. So I just want to read a piece of what Charlene had written, because I think it really highlights and kind of pulls together the work and what Bindu and I are talking about. So she's referring to her husband, Ben. Ben and I still didn't realize how seriously sick I was. Everything's going to be okay, he kept saying. Like good Berkeleyites, we chose to take the natural route. We didn't trust antidepressants. I was terrified of them, terrified that drugs would take away the last remains of my brain that seemed to be the only threads left preventing me from hurting myself, Anza, my daughter, or someone else. We didn't trust big medicine, white man's medicine, and we wanted to make sure I could still breastfeed. For weeks, Ben took me to all sorts of natural healers who tried endless remedies on me: acupuncture, Chinese medicine, massage, Reiki, B12, spirulina, breathing exercises, meditation, and even crystals and chimes. Many of them helped me relax in the moment, but none of them stopped the downward spiral, and worst of all, no one diagnosed me. So I think that really highlights some of the cultural threads. In the end, Charlene did connect with a psychiatrist. She had postpartum psychosis. She started on several medications and was feeling better shortly after, was on the road to recovery. But her story is an example of a postpartum psychosis that went underdiagnosed, undetected for a very long time because of maybe cultural misfit in a therapist and also somebody who was not trained in the treatment of maternal mental health concerns.
So belief, practices, and blueprints. Again, each culture, each ethnic background identifies different things that help support the women, help protect the women in terms of their new role as mother. So we outlined a few here, but one of the things I want to bring up is this hot-cold balance. Within the Chinese culture, oftentimes it's encouraged that they don't have anything cold after they deliver, because it impacts the bond with the baby, that coldness. So it's always warm drinks, warm baths, things along those lines. Mothers restricted activity for 40 days. My mother-in-law was very particular that I just rest. Now, for a type A person such as myself, that's very difficult. Just resting was very, very hard for me. I needed to be on the go. I had the laundry, I had this, I wanted to take care of the baby, I had to take care of all these other things. But that forced time really encouraged me to take a look at, I needed to do this in order to effectively bond and take care of myself, because guess what? After that 40 days, I had to be back on it. Recognition of a mother's new identity. You prepare, you prepare, you prepare. And culturally, what does it mean for each woman of a different ethnic background to be a mother? Female role we talked about before, rites of passage, illustrated in the example that I had given in terms of ceremonies. Motherhood, is it really an innate ability? We have to ask ourselves, how difficult? What are the challenges? What are the impressions? What messages do we get from our society, wherever that is, as we grow up? And then as we move into that role of motherhood, parenthood, generational differences. A lot of things that my mother's generation wanted to do during the birthing practices and post-delivery are things that are scientifically proven. No, don't give your baby honey in the first 6 months. No, but it's sweet. It makes them sweet when they grow up. I'll find other ways. We don't have to give them honey. We don't have to give the newborn honey right now. And having those kinds of conversations to educate, to share, to understand why. And oftentimes something I've realized, a lot of these traditions I just listened to. I didn't challenge until now I have my own children and I ask, well, wait a second, what's the meaning? What's the significance? Why do I have to do this? Well, we just did it for years. Okay, how do we break those trends? And is it easy to break or challenge those trends and gather more information? Now with Google, it's a whole different story, but still you have to battle that relationship with the family that's involved. So we'd like to do a case example, but for the sake of time, what we wanted you to do, and hopefully you'll carry this on after this wonderful, wonderful conference, turn to your partner and spend that time kind of taking a look at the cases that you've been involved with. What were your successes? What were your challenges from a cultural lens? And what would you do differently? Because again, part of this process is dynamic, learning from each other's examples and successes. Part of that is to have the cultural kaleidoscope lens on and looking at categories of health and healing. How do we view that? What's meaningful to us when we talk about health and healing within the different ethnic groups? Emotional support. What you may consider supportive may be very challenging for me to see that with a supportive lens. Intersection between mom and baby and the role behind that. When we look at the different ethnic groups, especially particularly within the Asian, the intersection between multiple caretakers and being alone and having to do it on your own. So things to keep in mind as we're working with our communities. So how do we bridge this gap? One of the things that we're constantly advocating for is education, 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 and treatment, right? But that's only one step of it. I'm a firm believer of the experiential learning aspect of it. And if I cannot step into Indian culture or the Latina culture, the African American culture, what do? What's the next best thing? You learn from other people's experiences and stories. We're all very captivated by narratives. Charlene, her story is incredible because this got released in public media without her family knowing. It was a very powerful outlet for her to be able to share that publicly before she went to her parents. It was easier for her to do it publicly. When you hear her talk, she says it was an amazing cathartic release to be able to put that out there and not be hiding behind this, and then be able to have that conversation with her own parents. So again, having greater awareness of cultural trends and traditions, the dialogue, understanding one size doesn't fit all, and the exposure and the experience are things that we very much advocate. Collaborative care, adding questions to address cultural competence when using assessment tools, moving away from pathology, operating from more of a strengths perspective, and moving towards empowering and inclusion. So we want to leave you with this video because we think these are the kind of the next steps and the next trends. And of all the things that we talked about today, so much of the burden of responsibility falls within your lap, our laps, to be able to continue this conversation, share the information and the knowledge. And the 2020 Mom Project is something that grew out of the California Maternal Mental Health Collaborative. Again, we talk about education, 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 and this video is going to highlight and kind of capture exactly what the 2020 Mom Project is all about, how we can continue this dialogue and this dance to help empower communities, mothers, and families, and next steps.
Did you know that mothers give birth to 4 million babies in the US every year? Let's face it, it is a joy, but also a challenge to enter motherhood. There are a lot of diapers to change, feedings, crying, sleepless nights, learning to care for a new baby, dealing with hormonal changes, and more. And new moms are expected to rest and recover with all of this. It can leave any new mom feeling overjoyed, but exhausted, overwhelmed, irritable, and anxious. During this transition, 80% of moms will experience the baby blues, which can include tearfulness and sadness, inability to sleep, changes in appetite, and self-doubt about being a good mother. The blues generally last a couple of weeks. But up to 20% will go on to experience something more serious, like postpartum anxiety or depression. These conditions are the most common complications of pregnancy. The problem is that most of these moms will never get the help they need. Here is why. First, most expecting and new parents are never told about maternal mental health disorders. Second, there is a shortage of mental health doctors and therapists, and not all receive training in maternal mental health, and those who are qualified to treat are not easy to find. Third, most OBGYNs and pediatricians do not screen moms for maternal depression or anxiety because of a number of obstacles, like lack of time and not knowing where to send moms for help. All of this makes it a broken system, and as a result, hundreds of thousands of moms and families suffer in the US every year. But we can solve this. First, let's recognize doctors alone cannot solve this problem. Since most moms deliver in hospitals, and millions more will have health insurance because of the Affordable Care Act. The 2020 Mom Project sets forth an alternative path to change by focusing on what hospitals and health insurers can do to help. For example, what if hospitals informed women and their families during childbirth classes about symptoms of maternal mental health disorders, whether they are at greater risk, and common triggers such as sleep deprivation? What if health insurers identified maternal mental health specialists in their directories and helped moms find treatments? What if OBGYNs hung posters in their office listing the symptoms with an 800 number to call for help? These are just a few of the changes the 2020 Mom Project recommends. We believe that together, these simple steps can lead to a big change by the year 2020. Learn more and join the movement at 2020momproject.com.
So we started out with a fun video went to an educational one, and now we have one where you can take something home and move forward with the cause. I want to thank you so much for your gracious time, interest, and empower you to continue the dialogue and the discussion. And I think we have a few minutes for questions. A few minutes for any questions you want to ask.
Yes. Absolutely. That's such an important question, and I feel like that goes so...
You want to repeat the question?
The question was, is it possible for a woman, let me make sure I heard it correctly, to have baby blues or postpartum depression if they're not the biological mother? That's such an important question. The answer is absolutely yes. We know biological factors play a role in the hormones, but having a child, whether or not that's biologically or caring for a child through way of adoption or helping to raise a child for a family member or a friend, is certainly a life stressor. I mean, certain things that babies bring, sleep deprivation, change of lifestyle, occur no matter how the baby has come to kind of enter your life. So.
And also one other aspect of that is that there is postpartum depression with fathers as well. It's an important piece, yes, as well. So yeah. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Sorry, thank you. That was my question. Do you have a plan for the fathers?
So we know there's a couple of colleagues, Dr. Will Courtney and Dr. Bruce Linton are two paternal mental health therapists in the Bay Area, and Dr. Courtney has done a lot of research and identified that we know that men also have a change of hormones after babies are born. Testosterone decreases because of the oxytocin that the baby brings by 30% after a baby is born. Also, what I find in my clinical work is however the relationship was between the partners, that changes once the baby comes because that's adding a third person to life. And so dads can feel a lot of pressure around work, maybe being sole financial providers during a maternity leave. They may miss their wives and the mothering, depending on the dynamic that they gave to them, and kind of have some feelings of neglect because they can't play as active of a role with the baby if mom's nursing and she's the one that had the baby. So that's such a great question. There are workshops for dads. I know several hospitals in San Francisco, CPMC does a whole series called From Partners to Parents, and in the group I facilitate at UCSF, we spend a whole kind of session and a half talking about how to support new dads. So great question.
And organizations such as Postpartum Support International, PSI, has opportunities to have that dialogue carried where fathers can join a call-in line to talk about the experiences and the kinds of symptoms and signs that they feel themselves going through this new process.
Okay, my question, can you hear me? My question is, I had a young lady call me. She had a miscarriage, and she was going through some, emotional issues, and I found there wasn't really anywhere that was helping her. So I was trying to find someone at the hospital level. I had social workers call me back. They said really there wasn't anything. So in that 2020 plan, did you guys consider that? Consider getting help for like women that have miscarriages and still are going through it without a baby?
Right. So
I would say 2020 Mom is a project that hopes to provide that type of support in hospitals for moms who, have had pregnancy loss or have babies and are suffering from maternal mental health concerns. In terms of other resources, though, for moms who are coping with pregnancy loss, I think in the Bay Area, at least, and I don't know if it's throughout California, there is an organization called SAND, Support After Neonatal Loss, for miscarriage or for stillbirth. And so that sometimes is a great place. I know sometimes hospital social workers tend to be, but that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother speech, which is pregnancy loss and miscarriage and how that's never really spoken about, how those moms feel like they have to grieve in silence.
So, and I think one of the things in the 2020 Mom Project, you're highlighting the realities out there, right? You've identified screening has taken place, but who do you refer, where do you refer, and the depletion of those resources. So one of the things that 2020 Mom is advocating for very strongly is the educational piece. So on our website, what you can do is share with the LCSW's mental health providers in your community. And there's a web-based training that allows them to have that extra training exposure and understanding of what goes into the PPD aspect of it.
All right.
Yeah, if you go to 2020 Mom, they'll have an education tag there, and the session has already started, but it's a 7-week session.
Okay, we've got one more question, and then I have to get you guys out of here. So go ahead, Marianne.
I just want to say how much I appreciate this conversation because we work with a lot of the parents, the mothers, when we go in and provide services to the children. And a lot of times what we'll see, or the form that we'll receive it in, is a child abuse report, submitting a report. And so when we talk with parents, I think that's just something that we really need, or mothers, I guess, we really need to keep at the forefront of our minds. Does this mother need services? Is she suffering from some kind of postpartum depression, anxiety, or something from that effect? The other thing is that as service providers, many of us are women, and so I think if we're going to talk about this issue, we should be willing, if we're experiencing those issues, to also seek help from our providers, and then kind of walk that walk and have it translate down to the people we're servicing.
Absolutely, it's a great point. I think one of the feedback that I get is that, okay, Bindu, you're so open talking about that. You'll say the word depression in a South Asian community because the stigma is there. So if I can be comfortable using that verbiage and language and expressing either situations that I've gone through personally or other examples, it helps to kind of normalize that and allow women to feel, families to feel that they're not alone. And that's what Postpartum Support International's take-home message is that you are not alone.
I have to wrap it up, guys. So let's say thank you to Julie and Bindu.